What up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of The Growth Blueprint. In this episode, we're going to be going over the core 4 aspect of nutrition. And so, if you haven't listened to the core 4 overview and then the core 4 episodes on sleep and movement, go ahead and make sure after you watch this that you go back and kind of catch yourself up on exactly what's going on. But our core 4 is the basic fundamental biological and physiological processes that our body requires for us to lead a healthy life, to lose weight, to build muscle, to do all of those things that are required for the kind of healthy, active lifestyle that you want to be living. And so in this one, we're going to be diving into nutrition. So without further ado, let's rock and roll. So first things first, we need to decide what exactly it is that we're talking about when we say things like nutrition. Okay, and so when it comes to the health and fitness space, there are a lot of different words that you see and hear popping up on social media, when you're reading stuff, when you're listening to podcasts, all of that kind of thing. And so when it comes to nutrition, we're going to mainly be focused on talking about metabolism, okay, calories, energy, macros, which are proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, and micronutrients, which are vitamins and minerals, okay? And then there are some other things that you can kind of toss into the nutrition bucket, but we're probably not going to talk too much about those, maybe touch on them briefly, but everything else doesn't matter. So when it comes to nutrition, these are the terms that matter. These are the terms that belong in the same bucket as one another when it comes to talking about nutrition and health and fitness. So first of all, we're going to build this up from first principles here so that we can really understand what we're talking about and what's going on. So why do we eat? Right? Why do we eat? All right, I want you to think about and ponder that question for a second. And the obvious answer is, well, we need to eat, right? If we don't eat, we'll starve. And you would be correct, right? We eat because it provides us energy, okay? And so when we're talking about energy, we start to talk about things like metabolism and calories. And so we're gonna start from first principles here. So there is a class of organisms on this planet called consumers. Okay, there are only 2 categories. There are producers and there are consumers when it comes to energy and metabolism. And so producers are things that make their own energy. Okay, these are things like plants, right? They are making energy, kind of. They're still, using sunlight and doing photosynthesis, but they're creating their own fuel, right? And then there are consumers, and consumers are exactly what they sound like. They are things that consume other things, and that's how they get their energy. And so there are producers and there are consumers. Consumers are everywhere, right? Your pets are consumers, your kids are consumers, bugs are consumers, mushrooms are consumers, fish are consumers, lots of bacteria are consumers. Consumers are everywhere. They're all over the place, right? And so all of these things that consume other things to get their energy, they're getting macronutrients, okay? And so bacteria consume other stuff, and when they consume those other things, they're trying to obtain macronutrients. They're trying to obtain proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, lipids, okay? This is where macros come into the idea of nutrition, right? When it comes to what we're consuming, what all consumers are consuming proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Okay, so why those? Well, in the grand scheme of metabolism, if we can think back to middle school or high school biology, where you learned that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Now, you may remember learning that, you may not, but that's probably about where your understanding of the mitochondria stops. So the mitochondria can be best thought of as a little furnace, okay? Like a wood-burning stove. that every single one of our cells has, and it has lots of them. Every one of our cells has lots of mitochondria. And these mitochondria, their job, just like the wood-burning stove in a house, is to burn stuff to create heat and energy. And so mitochondria can burn proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. They're things that they can burn to create energy. And this process of burning these things to create energy is measured in calories. Calories are actually a unit of heat. Okay, a lot of people don't know that a calorie is actually a measurement of heat. That's what it is. It's like a BTU. If you camp or you do stuff around, I mean, maybe your furnace has BTUs on it, a blowtorch has BTUs on it, but a BTU is a measurement of heat, just like a calorie is a measurement of heat or energy that can be produced. And so when it comes to burning proteins, calories, and fats, these are the substrates that our mitochondria can turn into energy. And this process of turning these things into energy is the exact same process that occurs when you light something on fire. It's combustion. It's really, really cool. And so on a tiny little microscopic scale, okay, your cells will take proteins, carbohydrates, and fats and do a little bit of chemistry to turn them into the right fuel. You could imagine this like, you can't shove a whole tree in a wood-burning stove, obviously, right? You have to chop it up and make it the right size to be able to be burned. Similarly, our body will do some processing to these macronutrients to turn them into the thing that can go into the mitochondria and be burned. But the reason that we breathe, the reason that we have lungs and breathe, is so that we can inhale oxygen. And this inhalation of oxygen, these oxygen molecules then are shuttled to the mitochondria, where they are mixed with these proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, and literally burned. It's the same form of combustion that happens when you burn something in a wood-burning stove or light a campfire. We all know that we've probably heard that oxygen is an oxidizer, right? And so when you light something on fire, oxygen comes in, oxidizes the stuff, and then smoke and heat and light and energy is released. Well, that's exactly what happens in our bodies. That's exactly what our physiology is doing when we're creating energy. It's just happening on a tiny little microscopic scale. We inhale oxygen. The oxygen goes to the mitochondria, where it's combined with proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, and they are oxidized. They are burned. The combustion occurs. And in the process of combustion, CO2 is created, which we exhale, right? And energy is created. And so when we're talking about nutrition and we're talking about macros and we're talking about calories, this is what's going on. Okay, so there's this cellular process that happens at a microscopic scale in every cell in our body that requires proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Now, when we're talking about proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, our body doesn't like to burn them equally well, okay? And so a good way to think about that is to think about, different kinds of wood that you might be burning, okay? Our body prefers to burn carbohydrates because they're the easiest thing to burn. They require the least amount of chopping up and preparation before they have to be put into the mitochondria to burn. And so carbohydrates are the main source of energy for our cells that our bodies use, okay? Carbohydrates beyond energy production don't have a whole lot of function in our physiology. Their role as other things kind of stops at energy. They're pretty much just used to create energy. And while proteins and fats are also used to produce energy, they are used for other things as well. And so all of our cells are a little bubble, right? you may have seen an illustration of a cell. Maybe you remember back in high school biology about learning about cells, but cells have this interesting thing called a phospholipid bilayer, which is just a bunch of word salad that means that the cell membrane is made up of fats. And so fats are going to not only be used for energy production, but they're used for a lot of other things as well. You've probably heard that cholesterol, right, a form of fat, is used in the biosynthesis of most of our hormones that our body creates. They're used for this phospholipid bilayer, the cell membrane that we have. They're used in something called myelin, which is something that surrounds our nerve cells so that they can communicate more efficiently. It's used in our eyeballs, right? It's used in lots of different tissues. It's used in some of our connective tissue. And so fats are a structural component of a lot of our cells that is required for our cells to be able to do what our cells do. And so fats are not only used for burning and creating energy, but they're also used as a structural component in a variety of different cells and processes and substrates for creating stuff within our body. And then proteins, our body doesn't like to burn proteins. And so there are 21 amino acids. And an amino acid is just it's a unit. So if we think about Legos, okay, you might have Lego blocks. Lego blocks are a lot like amino acids. And proteins are when you have lots of Lego blocks stuck together. A protein is just a chain of amino acids. Okay, and so there are 21 amino acids. There are 9 essential amino acids, and these are amino acids that our body cannot produce. They are amino acids that we must consume. Human physiology cannot create them. Other organisms can create them. We cannot create them, and so we must consume them in order to get them into our body so our body can use them. And so when it comes to protein, we all are probably aware that muscle tissue is made out of proteins. And so a large percentage of the protein that we consume goes to maintaining our muscle tissue itself, right? Whether you are or are not exercising, everybody has skeletal muscle because we move around, right? We need it to exist and move and do stuff. And so the majority of our protein that we consume is going to go towards that. Another large component of the protein that we consume goes to the creation of something called an enzyme. And an enzyme is like a piece of equipment. It's like a piece of machinery. It's cellular machinery. And so just like a construction site has lots of machines that they're using to do the work that needs to be done, our body has lots of machines. Our cells have lots of machines that it uses to do the jobs that it needs to have done as well. And so this is everything from hormone synthesis to cell division to creating signaling molecules to, everything. Everything our body does requires enzymes. And enzymes are just these fancy proteins that our body creates out of our DNA. And so when we talk about DNA is the blueprint for us, right? It's the blueprint of an organism. But this blueprint doesn't say like put an arm here, put an eye here, put the hair there. It doesn't really work like that. What it actually is it's a gigantic strand that says make all of these proteins and make this much of these proteins, and that's what our DNA is. And so our DNA is a blueprint that says make these proteins, these enzymes. And so we make those enzymes, all of these proteins, out of amino acids. And the amino acids we get from consuming stuff that has amino acids in it. So now that we understand what we're actually talking about when we're talking about like nutrition, I guess let's talk about vitamins and minerals real quick. So vitamins and minerals are micronutrients, right? Vitamins and minerals, the purpose of vitamins and minerals are to help enzymes do what they're supposed to do. And so a good way to think about what a vitamin and a mineral is, when they get into our physiology, we talk about them as something called a cofactor. And so what a cofactor is an enzyme may not be able to do its job without a magnesium molecule. or a vitamin B molecule, or a, pick your thing, whatever. It can be anything without a sodium molecule, potassium, vitamin A, vitamin K, vitamin E, blah, 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 whatever. Enzymes need this thing called a cofactor in order to do their job. And so you can think about a cofactor almost like the key to the ignition of a piece of machinery on a work site, right? The machinery can be there, but without the key, it's not very useful. You need to have that key in order to get the thing to do what it needs to do. And so that's what a micronutrient is. And so when we're consuming everything that we're eating, we're getting vitamins and minerals in our, well, hopefully we're getting vitamins and minerals in our nutrition, right? So that we can get all the cofactors required to run the enzymes, so the enzymes can do what the enzymes need to do, like processing our other macronutrients, turning them into the fuel substrates so our mitochondria can burn, making the enzymes out of the amino acids so that we can continue to do our cellular processes. All of these things are what make up the category of nutrition, or what we're eating. And so now, something that we haven't really talked about is what kind of comes along for the ride as perception, the subjective aspect of nutrition, right? So we just talked about all the objective stuff, right? The stuff that doesn't change, because that really doesn't change. Like, there's not someone out there that for some reason doesn't need to eat protein. That's not a thing, right? There's not a consumer on the planet that like can get away with not consuming fats. Like, we're eating all of that. That stuff's subjective. It doesn't really change. It's the way that it is. But there's this subjective aspect of nutrition, right? And this subjective aspect of nutrition is kind of where we get all of these diets and where we get diet culture kind of in general. And so along with the subjective aspect of nutrition, we're kind of getting into, well, how much of the specific macros should I eat? What ratio works best? Do I need to use supplements? Right? This is where we start to get into where things kind of start to fall apart for a lot of people, because this is where there's a whole bunch of hoopla all over the place on the interwebs about all of this stuff. And so what I want to provide for you here is a frame of reference that you've probably heard me use that works really well in kind of determining what to eat, how to eat, and some fundamental principles in doing a good job with your nutrition. And so the decision-making framework that I like to tell people about is the hunter-gatherer frame of reference. And so our physiology hasn't really changed since our ancestors were hunter-gatherers. They have a nose and a mouth and eyes and hair and ears and arms and legs and toes and fingers and hearts and lungs and buttholes, and, we're the same. Physiologically, we're the same. Hasn't really changed. And what that means is that our physiology, right, the conglomerate of all of our cells and all of our body systems and the way that they all work, are adapted to function most optimally eating in a particular way. And so I don't really like to create meal plans for people. I don't. I think that meal plans are a cop-out and they are a crutch. Sometimes I will. I won't say that I never do. Sometimes I will, but generally I don't. And generally I don't recommend that people try to adhere to a specific diet. Instead, what I try to do is I try to get people to eat whole foods, okay? And the reason that I get people to try to eat whole foods is because our ancestors were eating whole foods, okay? They were eating the animals that they caught, the edible vegetation that they could find, berries, nuts, seeds, right? They were eating raw ingredients, okay? And the reason that I really try and push people to consume raw ingredients is twofold, okay? First of all, with processing of foods, I understand that, again, here's a big caveat, okay? I don't have a super negative opinion on big food, I guess you could say, or the ultra processed food that we have in the United States today. I see it as a necessary evil, right? If we snapped our fingers tomorrow and all ultra processed food was gone, hundreds of millions of people in the United States would starve to death. They would, because so many people rely on these super cheap, ultra processed foods that companies can make mass quantities of relatively quickly to survive. And so it was a necessary evil to be able to feed people, enough people, efficiently enough to get us to where we are today. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not problems. And these are the problems that we find ourselves in today. And so with processing of foods, often there's two problems. One is oftentimes they lose nutritional value. And so when we say nutritional value, we got to go back to the objective stuff and say, okay, does it have the micronutrient content that it used to have? And the answer is no. So you're missing out on vitamins and minerals that would have been there if you were eating a whole food variant of the thing. And two, oftentimes processed foods have additives in them that are not great for us. Things like emulsifiers, things that keep them from spoiling, which again, right, we needed to do this in order to get us to where we are today, but they're not good for us, right? And so we're adding bullshit that's not good for us, and we're taking away stuff that is good for us. And so the more processed something is, the bigger those two problems become, okay? And so this is why I really encourage people to try to eat a whole foods diet, because we were designed to eat that. That's what we ate for a long time. And now, when we eat processed stuff, it's lower quality because it's missing the stuff that it used to have, and it has crap that it didn't have back in the day, okay? And so you may be wondering, you may be asking yourself, well, okay, I mean, I eat a pretty whole foods diet, right? But I'm still stuck, I'm still bloated, I still can't lose weight, so on and so forth. Great, perfect. This next part is just for you. So now that we understand the objective aspects of nutrition, and we understand why it's best to eat a whole foods diet, now we have to talk about something called energy balance. Okay, and so we're gonna go back to the objective stuff for just a second here, right? When we're talking about burning proteins, carbohydrates, and fats to create energy, right? Every one of our cells needs a specific amount of energy to do everything that it needs to do in a day and not die, okay? If a cell ceases to be able to produce energy, it dies. And so we don't want to die. We can't have our cells be dying, right? And so if you take up and you take the energy needs of every single cell and you add them up, right, into a human body, we can say, okay, the entire human body requires this amount of energy to run all of its systems, to do all of its things, to clean up all the waste, and to not die. This is what we call total daily energy expenditure, or what we also call metabolism in general. Most people call that metabolism. It's not a great definition of metabolism. Metabolism is better referred to as the chemical reactions that require energy that happen within our physiology. And total daily energy expenditure is a better way to discuss the amount of calories that we burn every day. And so when it comes to nutrition and fueling our body correctly, okay, there are some giant problems out there that I want to discuss to make sure that you do not fall victim to these things, okay? And so the first one is calculators online, all right? Calculators online do not do a good job estimating your specific circumstances for helping you understand what you need to be consuming. The calculators online assume perfect conditions, and they assume that you've not done anything to your body to hinder your metabolism. And so calculators online assume that all of your core 4 are completely perfect, which they're not. They're definitely not. I promise. But they're not built to be able to take that into account. Okay, and so many of you have probably had this experience. If you haven't, just go Google TDEE, Total Daily Energy Expenditure Calculator, calculate it out, have it spit out a number, and you're gonna shit your pants because you're gonna go, what? I'm supposed to eat how many calories a day? Because it's gonna blow your mind. You know, you might be a 5'4" woman that's 150 pounds, you know, and you work out 2 or 3 times a week. You're gonna have to eat like 2,300 calories. And it's insane. It's like, yeah, you're definitely not eating 2,300 calories. Okay, and so those things are not a good place to start. All right. The other thing to really avoid is the trackers, the wearables. So those things will try and estimate the amount of calories that you've burned in a day. Okay, and they've actually done research on these things, and they've collected as many of them as they can that measure the calories that you burn, and they've compared them against the only real way to measure calories, which is measuring the amount of CO2 that you're producing, right? If we go back to the objective stuff, we talked about how we inhale oxygen to burn stuff, we exhale carbon dioxide. So if you measure the amount of oxygen that you breathe, the amount of carbon dioxide that you exhale, you can calculate how much energy you're creating. You can calculate exactly your miles per gallon that we have going on to figure out exactly how many calories that you're burning in a specific period of time. And so when comparing these wearables to the actual reality of the calories that you burn, they varied in accuracy, and they could be up to 90% wrong, which is super, super wrong, right? I mean, it could say that you burned 500 calories, and in reality you burned 70. So they can be super, super wrong. Okay, so don't fall for that one either. Okay, the best way to do this is the most pain in the ass way, but it's the best way. And so it's the way that I teach my clients how to understand this. And so the process that we go through to fix the core 4 of nutrition is, first of all, just get to the point where you're preparing your own meals using whole foods and eating on a consistent basis. Okay. Once we get that taken care of, because that's most people's biggest problem, is an inability to even consume whole food based meals on a consistent basis. That's most people's biggest problem, right? If you're not eating 3 times a day, 7 days a week, and preparing 19 out of 21 of those meals, you're not doing as good of a job with your nutrition as you think you are. And so this is a great example that I love to use for people, but 19 out of 21 is 90%. That's 2, okay? 2, that's it, right? Heaven forbid you're missing 5 meals a week, or you're not preparing 5 meals a week. That's like a low C. 2, 4, 5, yeah, that's a low C. Okay, so again, the consistency of preparing and consuming your own meals on a consistent basis is way harder than most people think it is. Because a 90%, we all want A results, right? A 90%, a low A, is 2 misses a week. A+ results is 1 miss a week. That's insane, right? That's very difficult. And I'm not trying to say this to shame anybody. I just want to say this to bring the reality to front of mind here for a second, right? Because that's a huge problem. And so when we're dealing with this, right, we get to the point where we're doing this consistently, anywhere from 17 to 19 meals that you're preparing yourself, that you're eating every week. Okay, so that we can actually make sure that we're getting whole foods with the micronutrients that we need, with macronutrients that are good, and we're leaving out the processed bullshit with all the additives and the low quality foods. Once we do that, and we're doing this on a consistent basis, instead of trying to guess how much we should be eating and guess how many calories we're burning, we just measure it. Okay, and it's very simple to measure this thing. okay? All you have to do is record what you're eating, right? So that we know how many calories we're consuming every day. And then we just measure our body weight, okay? Because there's this thing called the law of thermodynamics. There's one of the laws of thermodynamics says that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, okay? And this is an immutable law of nature. It's something that governs the way that the universe around us works, okay? Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. And what that means is that if you eat in a calorie deficit, right, you will burn calories coming from the tissues that you have to make up the energy difference, because we can't just magically create energy out of nothing. And so by measuring the amount of calories that you're consuming and measuring if your weight is going up, going down, or staying the same, we can start to determine how many calories you are actually burning in a day. And from that point, then we can actually start to decide what do we need to do to continue to fix the core 4 of nutrition. And so the next thing that we focus on is protein. And so when it comes to required amounts of protein that you must consume, if you're exercising, the literature is pretty clear that we need to have 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Now, that's kind of a lot to just kind of wrap your head around. And so my general recommendation, which is also still just a lot because it's a lot of protein, is 1 gram of protein per pound of goal body weight, which again is a lot of protein, right? Which, if you're going, wow, that is a lot of protein, that's part of the problem, right? And that's why you're listening to this podcast in the first place, is because your shit's not straight and we got to fix that. And one of those things that we got to fix is protein. And so for most women, I say let's just eat 120 grams to start with, okay? And we'll go from there. And that's usually a lofty enough goal to get started and work on for a while. For men, we're talking like 150, okay? And we just got to start working on getting consistent eating that amount of food. And then we measure how many calories we're eating, what your body weight's doing, and we can assess if we're in a calorie surplus, which means we're gaining weight, if we're in calorie maintenance, which means burn and consumption is equal, which means body weight's not going to be changing, or if we're losing weight, which means that the amount we're burning is less than the amount of energy that we're consuming, which means this difference here, right? There's a difference. And because there's a difference, and because the law of thermodynamics dictates that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, means that this energy has to come from somewhere. It's not just magically coming out of nowhere. And it's coming from us taking the stored proteins, carbohydrates, and fats in our body, converting them into energy so that this gap ceases to exist. And that energy that our body takes and uses, that used to be tissue, and it's turned into energy and carbon dioxide, then is no longer on our body, and that's how weight loss actually occurs. Okay, and so let's kind of bring this full circle and down to earth and actionable. Okay, so if your core 4 of nutrition is screwed up, first of all, check the description in this video, because I have a really cool assessment that it's a cool AI powered assessment. I trained this AI to learn what's wrong with your core 4 of nutrition and tell you how to fix it. So take that, it's completely free. It doesn't even ask for an email or phone number, it's just completely free. Go ahead and take that so you can get some actionable steps on how to start fixing this. But let's say that your core 4 of nutrition is not optimized, okay? First of all, first step is start to prepare your own meals, okay? And just track it, right? The 19 out of 21, right? 21 meals in a week. And you might say, well, I'm not hungry at this time, blah, blah, whatever, fine, quit, all right? You need to eat 3 meals a day, 7 days a week if you want to be successful. You can argue that point with me in your head, because this is a video and you can't argue with me directly. But if you're not eating 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, you're not going to lose weight, all right? So first of all, if you're not doing that and you're not making all of those meals yourself out of Whole Foods, first of all, that's the first thing you got to do. Don't worry about anything else. Don't worry about proteins, carbs, fats, calories, none of that. Just start working on the habit of making and consuming 21 meals a week, or as many as you can, right, out of whole foods. Okay, that's number one, start there. Number two, look at your protein. So start monitoring how much protein you're consuming and start to try to get that up to 120 if you're a female, 150 if you're a dude, okay? Then, once you are eating consistently and your protein looks good, record your weight, record your calories. And then you'll only fall into one of three categories. You're either gonna be eating more than you burn, which means your weight's gonna be going up. You're gonna be eating the same as you burn, which means weight's gonna be roughly stable. Or you're gonna be eating less than you burn, which means that you're gonna be losing weight, okay? From that information, then we can start to understand what your total daily energy expenditure is, what we need to do to start losing weight, if we need to be eating more, if we need to be eating less, if there's something else that might be going on. And that's how we start to understand our core four of nutrition so that we can balance that, optimize it, start to build those habits, build those routines to get your nutrition fixed so that we can move on to the other core fours so that you can lose body fat, build muscle mass, improve your energy, feel really good, and start living that healthy, active lifestyle that you want to live in the body that you want to live it in. So that's what I got for you today. That's our episode on the core four of nutrition. If you thought that that was awesome, if you thought that it was worth the time that you invested in the podcast with me today, I would greatly appreciate it if you could rate the show, share the episode with somebody. That's how this thing grows. That's how I get this information out to more people. And that's my passion, is helping people understand their bodies so that they can live amazing lives, feel amazing, be amazing examples to their kids and the people around them. And so it would mean the world to me if you could share the show, if you could review the show, if you thought that it was worth your time. But thank you for investing your time with me today. It's your most valuable asset, and so I don't take that for granted. And I will see y'all in the next one.